friends, comrades, thank you for coming. It feels like the fifth day of the Conservative Party conference, which is a sign of how fertile and active we are here. Can I just start by, for those of you not familiar with Onward, if you're wondering, well, why do we need another think tank? Onward has burst onto the Conservative scene as, I think I can spare your blushes, Will, the arrowhead of the new thinking for a new generation that is required. I think I may even have just repeated your strapline. But Onward is based, founded in Will's insight that timeless Conservative values, they may be, but the challenges of a new generation require some really fresh thinking and some fresh questions to be asked. And there's always room in the think tank scene for a new think tank. But I think it's a sign, Will, of both your and the team's excellence, but also the relevance of what you're doing, that I think it's fair to say Onward has become the Conservative think tank in the last 18 months for fresh thinking and for connecting with the new generation. So thanks for doing it. Having set up the Big Tent Festival, I know that it's one thing to say, I'm going to do this. It's another thing to actually do it and burst onto a very competitive scene. Look, I'm going to try and be quite provocative because I think Tuesday conference requires it, and this agenda needs it. And I'm going to start by saying that as a Conservative, before we gather as Conservatives, really worried about the disconnection between mainstream electorate and the political elite. A new generation of voters who really wonder whether government itself, the way we do it, is such an old-fashioned idea that really they don't need to worry about voting, because it doesn't matter who you vote for, it doesn't matter, it's all men in suits doing old-fashioned analog government. It's part of the problem, not part of the solution. And at a time when my constituents and many people in the country, I think in the summer of 2016, voted, yes, they may have voted on the sort of jurisprudential failings of the EU, but my constituents in mid-Norfolk, 62% leave, voted primarily, I think, Annabelle may endorse this as a former diligent local reporter who knows the area, they voted really for something else. They voted for a big and bold change in the power dynamic in our political economy. It was, certainly for my constituents, a roar that a model of growth, a model of politics, a model of power, political economy, complex phrase for a simple idea that the machine should work for you, wasn't working for them. And unless we grip it as a Conservative Party, unless we are prepared to acknowledge the grievances, which is quite difficult when you've been in power for 8 years, particularly in government, ministers, when you start a speech with, let's be honest about the real scale of the problem. And officials say, I wouldn't be that honest, Minister, I'd cross that. The machine tries to defend you from that. Unless we're honest about it, then we're not going to get people really coming with us on the solutions. And I want to suggest that grievance about disconnection, people and places left behind, an economy that works for too few, not enough, a lack of people's ability to control their own destiny, to control their own prospects, is a huge opportunity for Conservatives. It's of course a major political challenge which we're all seeing. But if we get this right, I am absolutely convinced that part of the solution, so that in 20, 30 years we bounce our grandchildren on our knees and say, you had to be there. It was a terrible few years of real division. But in the end, we got Brexit over the line, and much more importantly, we embraced a whole new vision of a modern, dynamic 21st century British political economy. It was a change moment on a scale of 1975, 1945, 1905, 1865. This happens every 40 or 50 years. And at the heart of it, I think the central challenge is dramatically extending people's power over their own destiny and their ability to shape their own circumstances. And as we think about that, to me, digitalization is one of the great opportunities, a technology that can allow us to radically empower people and radically modernise the state so it can become what we all want it to be, which is more responsive, more accountable, more direct, and more connected. So I don't think this is just, dare I say it, a conversation about the digital economy, vital though that is. I don't think it's just about modern public services that are there for you when you need them, vital though that is. I actually think it's also something else. It's about creating a new political economy, a digitally connected citizenship, and a political class that is capable of dealing with that challenge. And that, I think, is a magnificent prospect. Let me be a bit specific about where I think this could particularly change the game. And by the way, if we don't change the game, the comrades are marching very slowly with their ankles tied together, but nonetheless marching towards number 10. We have to stop them, and we have to stop them with ideas. We have to stop them with passion and power and conviction and analysis. Simply saying they're not fit for office ain't going to cut it. We have got to speak to the grievances that they're feeding on, and I think this agenda falls in that space. So look, let me give you 3 examples of where I think digitalisation could do this and already is. In health, in transport, and in finance and fintech. So in health, the area in which I had a career before coming to Parliament, digitalisation and the appliance of data isn't just changing, it is and has transformed the world of drug discovery and medicines. 100 years of history in 60 seconds. In the old model, basically scientists used to see if they could work out how disease took hold, and then they'd identify a metabolic pathway, and then they'd try and invent a compound that might be able to block it, and then they'd see if they can turn it into a compound that you could swallow and it would remain and go in the blood. And after 15 years, 80% failure rate trying to develop a drug for everyone, $2 billion per drug. Digitalisation has allowed us to do something amazing. We can now look at a cohort of patients in this room, look at your anonymised patient records, look at your genotype, and finally realise, before we start to develop the drugs, that there are a third of people in this room who are not going to get the disease. A third, say, who will get the disease but won't respond to the current drugs. We can start to design drugs around the people who are going to get the disease and in the way they get it. And that'll take 6, 7, 8 years out of the drug discovery process. Radically reduce cost, radically reduce risk. It's a total paradigm shift. And it was for that reason that when David Cameron asked me to set up our first life science industrial strategy, at its heart were 2 big initiatives. 1, to unlock the power of digital health data in the NHS. And 2, to lead the world in the digitalisation of genomics. We're the first country to announce and now to have successfully sequenced the entire genome of 100,000 NHS patients, which allows us to begin to unlock that revolution. Now we've gone to 500,000, and around the world people are saying, wow, the Brits are leading in allowing us to do that research. And we're leading the world in how you do it at a high ethical standard with NHS values at its heart. We're not selling a genome, not selling a database, selling the access to click and play, charging industry revenues, and that money is going to pay for molecular diagnostics in the NHS. And it's all driven by the ability to use digital insights. And now AI is allowing us to go further and do predictive drug discovery. So we now don't have to kill mice and rats and primates. We can now use AI to forecast what the toxicology profile of the drug is going to be. This is unbelievable technology, and guess what? Britain actually leads in it. At the Wellcome Trust Sanger Centre in Cambridge, but in other clusters, we're leading the world in this. It's going to allow us to design drugs for real patients in real time. And guess what? Patients, by providing the data, will then be able to control through charities the pricing. There's a massive power shift to empowered patients and their charities who will control the golden asset in modern drug discovery. Inspired? Yes. Good. Right. Let's look at transport. So in my new brief, Minister for the Future Transport, and by the way, we have a Prime Minister for the first time who's been a mayor, who's passionate about buses and about transport and places and connection. I mean, for me, it's an absolute joy, and here to having more mayors come through the Conservative Party to become Prime Minister. And his brief to me was, George, go to DFT and shake it up from being a department for yesterday's modal silos, aviation, air, rail, road, go across the silos and lead a revolution of place-based multi-mobility. And I framed the programme around 3 Ds: decarbonisation, disconnection, and digitalisation. Just lift the lid for you on what digitalisation could do. Imagine when you use Citymapper, it basically helps you to find the quickest route. Imagine if we were doing carbon travel to work area mapping, and it gives you a green route. Imagine, if possible, if it says, look, if you want to reduce your carbon footprint, get a carbon credit, you could go this way. Imagine if you decided to drive your gas guzzler into the middle of a town or to a school gate and pump particulates into children's lungs, it said, okay, well, that's your right, but actually we'll get a ban it in school gates and cities, but if you choose, you're going to have to pay. And you start to price on behaviour. And then we start to reward people on behaviours. Imagine if you were capturing that data, you could then reward local authorities or cities that start to really embrace clean, sustainable living. And digitalisation makes that possible in a way that analogue government could never have done. With all of us carrying phones, we now know where we're going, and you can start to develop apps to allow people to plan a green life and reward them. And that then opens up the lid on the possibility of doing proper connected carbon trading, carbon credit trading. Imagine if you said to my constituents in Mid-Norfolk, who've got very high vehicle dependency in low-income rural areas, their carbon entitlement should be very high. They need it. Imagine if we then said to them and to Norfolk County Council, if you can reduce that carbon dependency, you get the credit, actual money. We can start to really drive a much more connected revolution. And lastly, in fintech, if people are worried, and I think they are, and I think they should be, I used to co-chair the All-Party Group for Inclusive Growth. It's an agenda we need to shape as a party, or else the comrades will. If people are worried that the bank bailout represented a very broken model of out of control, unaccountable remuneration by the boys' club at the top of businesses, in which far too many people aren't able to control their destiny, they have to put their money, if they have any, into some pension fund, and they don't really know who's running it. And fintech allows us to begin to do extraordinary things with our own money. You can start to put your money into microfinance to support international development. You can back ethical companies. You don't need to run one or start one. You can just use the power of digital to put your money behind the values and the purposes that you want. And we think of the City of London as sort of 5 big banks. And there's about 50,000 businesses in the City of London. And the fintech revolution is incredibly exciting because it allows us to start both to do investment in a different way, but also allows us to start creating social and health impact bonds so that people can start to back bond finance for places that are doing sustainable development. Now, those are 3 examples of digitalisation really profoundly changing the power dynamic in our political economy. And if government starts to properly embrace that, then I think we do several things. We re-inspire people that government is listening and is accountable. We re-empower citizens to take choices. We also happen to make Britain the world's go-to place for digitalisation. And I think that is a win-win-win.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, George.